Welcome to the Mitochondria Mastery Map. In this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the 5 steps that I use in my practice to support mitochondrial health and to successfully manage chronic illness. So what is the Mitochondria Mastery Map? This map summarizes my signature 5-step process for walking clients through cellular healing. So we begin first with support and drainage. Second is parasite cleansing. Third is addressing mold and metals. Fourth is rooting out Lyme and other co-infections, as well as any other pathogenic bacteria that might be there. And finally, we focus on viruses and retroviruses, and we clean up. So while every client's process will look different according to their bio-individual needs, virtually everyone will follow an outline that very closely mirrors this, and they will move in this precise order, and there's a good reason for that. So let's take a closer look at what the mitochondria do and why we take these steps in this specific order. So our mitochondria are our energy factories. They rapidly produce molecules called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and our bodies use ATP as a power source. So without ATP, our bodies cannot do anything. This includes muscle movements, this includes digestion, and most importantly, this includes healing. So we need ATP for any and all bodily processes. And our mitochondria are making that for us. So this is really important because when mitochondria are stressed, they stop producing ATP and instead they move into a secondary defensive role. So they go from being in energy mode to being in battleship mode, and this is also referred to as cell danger response. So you can think of your mitochondria sort of like the canaries in the coal mine. They help to sound the alarm and communicate with the body's immune system at the first signs of something going wrong. So when mitochondria are met with a stressor in the body, they basically scramble from inside of the cell to outside of the cell. And when they're found outside of the cell, it works to signal the immune system and draw its attention to the area where there is this new perceived threat, right? So while this process is normal and necessary for a proper immune response, the conditions in modern life can often result in this process running amok, with too many mitochondria shutting down their energy factories and getting stuck in this battleship mode. So when this happens, there isn't enough energy anymore to power the body and by extension to heal. So this is why the mitochondria are key to healing and especially healing disease. So in general, you need well-functioning mitochondria in your body so that you can produce pure water for your cells, which is an energy production byproduct. So you can upregulate detoxification. Mitochondria stimulate death of cells or apoptosis. And this is important when they're damaged because it prevents mutations that lead to cancer. Mitochondria also fight viruses. They carry out cell signaling, sort of like what we just talked about, signaling the immune system. They also produce heat and they repair DNA. So why do mitochondria get stuck in this battleship mode? Why do they shift their role from being an energy factory into a battleship in the first place? So this happens because of stress. And in most cases, stress is brought on when a cell comes into contact with some kind of toxin. So here are the most common stimuli that can cause the mitochondria to enter into battleship mode. We see viruses, parasites, heavy metals, radioactive elements, medications, and then severe oxidative stress from all of these different phenomena in modern life, right? So pro-inflammatory and processed foods, unhealthy microbiome, exposure to plastic and phthalates, exposure to pesticides, to cigarette smoke, if you have chronic psychological stress, If you are exposed to radiation, a lot of EMFs. If you're using chemical cleaners, chlorine, or deodorizers, if you drink a lot of alcohol, if you have high blood sugar levels, if you are breathing in mycotoxins in your environment or toxins from mold, or if you have something like chronic Lyme or any other kind of bacterial presence that is pathogenic. So, the reality in modern life is that we are exposed to infinitely more toxic chemicals, radioactive elements, metals, and oxidative stress than ever before in history. So, the EPA has over 80,000 toxic chemicals that are registered to its database. And most of these have not been researched for their impact on human health. And many of these do have studies showing that they actually have deleterious effects on human health, but they're allowed to circulate anyway. And then our water databases show that radioactive elements, endocrine disruptors, and metals are ubiquitous in municipal water supplies. And many of us live in homes that are made out of pretty synthetic materials with poor ventilation, and we spend limited time outside. And this really increases our exposure to molds and other variables that lower our air quality. So, these are just a few of the sources of toxins that we're exposed to these days. This list could be so much longer. So, all of us are dealing with some level of toxicity that we carry around in our body, right? So, you could think about this sort of like a toxicity bucket whose level is dictated by a person's unique history and stimuli. So, those people who have been suffering with chronic illnesses for many years likely have toxicity buckets that are quite full, while healthy young people probably have very little in their toxicity buckets. So each of us also has a certain level of mitochondrial function, a rate at which our mitochondria are able to stay in energy mode versus convert into battleship mode. So you could think of your mitochondria function sort of like a battery with a certain degree of charge in it. So those with chronic illness will likely have a low charge in their battery, while younger, healthier people will have close to a full charge. So, taken together, populations with chronic illness have this overflowing toxicity bucket and a low mitochondrial battery charge. So, this creates sort of a seesaw imbalance. The gap between the low mitochondrial charge and the high toxicity bucket can be considered a healing deficit. So the body will never be able to heal or begin lowering the toxins in its bucket if mitochondrial function is lower than the toxicity levels. So therefore, the goal of our approach that we depict in the Mitochondria Mastery Map is to both raise up mitochondrial function while also lowering the toxicity that is contributing to mitochondrial dysfunction. So we have a two-pronged approach here, but it is all centered around the mitochondria. All right, so in doing this, we can achieve a rebalancing where our mitochondria battery is closer to full and our toxicity bucket is much lower, allowing the body's natural healing processes to finally get on top of what's happening in the bucket and managing it. So this is when we achieve a healing surplus. However, the order in which we attack these toxins and how we go about supporting the mitochondria is of the utmost importance. So going in the wrong order risks putting too much pressure on our drainage system, which can result in mitochondrial collapse. So let's take a look at each step on the Mitochondrial Mastery Map and explain why we move in the order that we do. Step 1 is to do 30 to 60 days of support and drainage. So when we start by boosting the mitochondria, it's going to help all of the other steps on the map to work much better, and will also work to increase tolerability and prepare the body for detox. But we also start with a focus on drainage to ensure that the toxins we target will be properly eliminated. So there are many different organ systems involved in drainage, and they're depicted in this funnel image here. So each lower step on the funnel must be working optimally in order for the steps above it to work well. So we want to start with our colon first and not tend to our cells up at the top there until absolutely last. So first we'll tend to our colon, then we'll do our liver and bile ducts, then we'll work on our lymph system. Then we can turn to our organs and tissues, and then finally we look at our cells. So if you do not move in this order, going from bottom to top, then you can experience a bottleneck, which will result in negative symptoms. So drainage is actually much different than detox. Detoxification is the process of eliminating toxins from the body, but drainage refers to how well your body's exit pathways are actually working. So are you able to eliminate your body's waste efficiently? So if detoxification is like cleaning out your house and putting the garbage on the curb, then drainage is how strong the garbage can will be in containing your rubbish. So an unreliable garbage can means a trash problem on your property. So the integrity of the infrastructure in your body that eliminates waste is what we're talking about when we're talking about drainage, not the actual elimination of toxins, okay? So the same is true for your body. So if you're not moving your bowels 1 to 3 times a day, if you're not sweating, if you're not supporting your liver, kidney, and lymphatic system, then you definitely are not ready to detoxify. In fact, any attempts at detoxification will likely result in the recirculation of what you're trying to get rid of, which will make all of your symptoms so much worse. So these are what we refer to as Herxheimer reactions, and they can include symptoms like anxiety, chills, headache, and tachycardia, among many other symptoms. And this happens as bacteria, fungus, parasites, viruses, and other pathogens are killed off, or as toxins recirculate in the bloodstream. So when pathogens die, they release endotoxins into the tissue and blood. And if the body can't keep up with the influx of die-off toxins, then Herxheimer reactions can definitely occur. So this is why we focus on supporting our drainage pathways first and foremost to avoid this eventuality. All right, so how do we take action on drainage? As I mentioned, I prefer to tackle drainage from the bottom of the drainage funnel on up. So that means first looking at the colon and making sure that you are moving your bowels 1 to 2 times a day for a healthy person, and for suboptimal people, 2 to 3 times a day. Second is the liver and bile. So we support phase 1, 2, and 3 of liver detox, with a special emphasis on bile movement. Next is the lymph system. So we can use therapies like Epsom salt baths, massages, dry skin brushing to make sure that the lymph is moving and can carry all of the waste to the liver. Fourth is the kidneys. So we use targeted herbs and enzyme supports to ensure the body's primary filtration system is not getting clogged up. And finally, we work on the mitochondria. So we leverage charged particles with fulvic and humic acids to kickstart the mitochondria back into energy mode. All right, so next we have parasite cleansing, which we usually do for 60 to 120 days. So the gut needs attention right away after drainage, but is ultimately the last to heal. So chronic parasitic infections are a modern-day health epidemic. We move into addressing parasites early in the journey because literature has shown that they actually can act as sponges in the body and can harbor other damaging substances that they may release as they die. So helminths, or worms, contain toxins and infections like pathogenic bacteria, including Lyme and co-infections. They contain heavy metals. Literature has shown that worms can actually eat their weight in heavy metals. They contain viruses, mold, and mycotoxins, and then they also sop up a lot of the environmental toxins that we're exposed to, things like pesticides, plastics, and other chemicals. So many practitioners currently miss this key step, right? So if we try to address Lyme, mold, or metals first, it ultimately translates to time wasted. So a typical Lyme protocol, for example, may work for a little while, but the infection will always come back if parasites have not been addressed. And that's because the bacteria will just hide in the helminths, just like we talked about on the previous slide, and then they reemerge when the protocol is over. So the same is true for metals, for mold, for chemicals. There will always be more to get rid of unless you're getting rid of the safe house where all of this stuff is living, which means the parasite. So if you have stubborn chronic infections, stubborn toxicity that you can't seem to move on, parasite cleansing is the missing link in your journey. So when parasites are present chronically over time, the body's Th2 immune response becomes elevated, while the Th1 immune response is lowered. So this imbalance makes it extremely difficult for the body to go after viruses or any other pathogen. So parasites can also harbor viruses and can induce the body to produce viruses. So if you deal with chronic Epstein-Barr, HPV, etc., then you likely have an underlying parasite issue that needs addressing first. But this, in a nutshell, is why we tackle parasites so early on in the journey, so that we are making sure we're getting rid of the safe house, but also so we allow your immune system to kind of rebalance and recalibrate so that it will be stronger as we tackle the other sources of toxicity and infection on the map. So action steps for parasite cleansing, you're going to bring any drainage support that is needed with you from step one. And then you're going to spend 1 to 2 months first focusing on gut-oriented parasites. You're going to use various herbs, mimosa pudica seed, and a quality binder to mop up everything that those critters release as they die. And then you're going to spend another 1 to 2 months targeting systemic parasites. So it's true that parasites can live in the GI tract, and that's often where we think of them, but they also can go systemic into our muscles, tissues, and organs. So we need to spend time doing a systemic cleanse. During that time, we're going to make sure to increase our lymph and drainage support, because the lymphatic system is what is going to be moving those parasites into our elimination pathways so that our body can actually get rid of them. And then we're going to be persistent and consistent. So the body is ready to release different layers of parasites at certain times. And there's also eggs to consider as well. So after you think that you're done, we will always just go a little bit longer. Okay, so then that brings us to the third step on our map, which is mold and metals. So we spend between 120 to 180 days focused on addressing mold and metals. So now that we have lowered your parasite load, we've busted biofilms, and have opened up your drainage pathways, we can begin to go after what was living in the parasites and in the biofilms, heavy metals and mold. So metals and mold go together like peanut butter and jelly. So when the body has too many heavy metals, it will actually allow fungus to take up residence, because that fungus will help to eat the metal and break it down, providing a buffer between the dangerous metals and your tissue. So this is why those with things like chronic candida infections will never be able to get rid of the problem until they address their metal burden. And it's why we always need to plan to address these two things together. So mold is important to address before we address Lyme and other pathogenic bacteria because its presence is known for making these types of infections much, much worse. So you could think of it like the match that lights the infectious fire caused by pathogenic microbes. So you're going to become more sensitive to those pathogenic microbes if mold is in your system. So many people will be unable to clear Lyme, co-infections, or other pathogens without meaningfully addressing mold first, which when we actually do eradicate it, it really results in a big boon for the immune system. Okay, so our action steps for mold and metals. Just like for parasites, we're going to bring any drainage support that is needed with us from step 1. Then we're going to incorporate 2 different fulvic acid-based binders focusing on heavy metals and on the biotoxins produced by mold called mycotoxins. The fulvic acid is the strongest chelator in science in that it's incredibly efficacious at removing metals, but it is not actually considered a chelator. It's much safer and much gentler than other chelators, so it's not technically a real chelator, but the end result is the same. So it nourishes, repairs, and gives nutrients as it cleans your tissue. So we're using fulvic acids instead of any hardcore chelators. We're also going to introduce an anti-candidal formula to tamp down on inflammation and clean up lingering residues. And finally, we emphasize sweating and oxygenating your internal terrain to create an environment that is inhospitable to mold. Okay, so that brings us to step 4 on our mitochondria mastery map, and that is to address Lyme and co-infections. And you're going to spend 30 to 60 days on this. So the goal with this phase is to conquer chronic microbe challenges and optimize wellness for the long term by promoting immune cell activity deep within the body, such as joints, organs, and the nervous system. So Lyme, its co-infections, and other pathogenic bacteria are everywhere. Yet Lyme often goes undiagnosed due to its reputation as the great imitator, working to mimic other diseases. So due to this, it's estimated that only about half of the people who have Lyme are actually diagnosed. And Lyme has over 150 different symptoms that are associated with it and can vary how it presents from person to person. So many mistakenly believe that a bullseye rash must appear after a tick bite in order to confirm Lyme. However, it has been demonstrated in literature that Lyme bacteria can take on different forms that do not bring the rash on. And so in reality, only about 30% of people who have Lyme see this rash. So even if you don't have Lyme, you may have a co-infection like Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, or Rickettsia, which often are transmitted by bloodborne pathogens as well. Literature has shown that these infections are ubiquitous and are difficult to detect, yet eliminating them can make the difference between getting stuck in a cycle of negative symptoms and moving forward in your health. What's more, the methods and therapies that we use in this step will work to eliminate virtually all pathogenic bacterial presences, even beyond those associated with ectoparasites. So that brings us to our action steps. So just like in the other steps, we're going to bring drainage support that was used in step 1 with us to continue to support the exit pathways for the body. We're also going to take great pains to support the lymph. So Lyme and its co-infections love to hide in the lymphatic system. So adding in therapies and herbs to support lymphatic flow provides a synergistic effect that allows a deeper cleansing. We're also going to cycle through targeted antimicrobials for Borrelia and the most common co-infections, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, and Rickettsia. So these herbs are also going to address a wide swath of pathogenic microbial presences, allowing the immune system to finally get ahead. And then often the biofilms that these microbes are housed in will dissolve as we deal with the infections. And it's important that we continue binding the metals, mold, and biotoxins being released to minimize their impact. All right, that brings us to our last step, step 5, which is virus and cleanup. And this lasts anywhere from 30 to 90 days. So viruses are the tiniest of microbes, and they can be a big obstacle in your recovery from complex chronic illness. Yet they're often overlooked. A virus is sort of like a hacker. It's simply genetic material surrounded by a protective protein shell. And these microbes cannot replicate on their own. So instead, they trick their host's cells into making copies so that they can spread. Once inside your cells, they cut some of the tripwires that would alert your immune system to their hostile takeover. And if you have complex chronic illness, certain long-term viral infections may be contributing to this. So common examples are Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus. Sometimes these appear alongside chronic Lyme disease and mold toxicity, but these types of chronic viruses can alternate between being active versus latent. And this means that they can appear and disappear and then be reactivated when your immune system is down. So even further from people's radar are retroviruses, and these are viruses that actually hide inside of your DNA. Retroviruses may not initially be active in your body, but they can be activated later on. In some cases, other viruses such as Epstein-Barr may activate retroviruses. Chronic inflammation can activate them. Lyme disease and mold toxicity are other common culprits that promote viral activation due to a weakened immune system. So after all of the work that your body has done at this point in your journey, it's likely that the pathogens, toxins, and inflammation that you've been addressing have activated some sort of viral activity. So we want to spend the last part of your healing process working to clear these viruses and quell any residual inflammation that they may be causing. So, action steps for viruses. Of course, we're going to bring drainage with us. We're going to mega support your mitochondria. So, mitochondria help to defend you against viruses, but viruses can also manipulate your cell's mitochondria to promote their survival. For example, viruses can impair your mitochondria's ability to produce energy. And viruses can also destroy mitochondria, reducing their numbers in your cells. So therefore, we need to give your mitochondria an extra boost during this phase to kind of combat against that. Next is antiviral therapies. We use a lot of medicinal mushrooms as well as some herbs that can really help to lower viral loads and also simultaneously boost the immune system. We push detox, so toxicity plays a significant role in how well your immune system functions. So improving your drainage and detoxification is vital to overcoming a viral challenge. Then we're going to bind with bioactive carbons, fulvic and humic acids. Lab research has shown that humic acid in particular triggers the death of liver cells when infected with a harmful virus. It can also inactivate viruses and pull retroviruses out of your DNA. Amazing. So there have been studies that have observed that behavior when it comes to herpes simplex virus 1, cytomegalovirus, and HIV. And then finally, we're going to soothe inflammation. So after kicking up everything in the first 4 steps, we need to work on soothing your tissue and cleaning up inflammation with targeted support. And that summarizes the mitochondrial mastery map. So the journey to better health is not always linear, and in some tough cases, you can take months or even years to see real progress. But in following a mitochondrial-centered approach that focuses on improving function at the cellular level, you can root out illness at the source and promote healing at the deepest level. So if your cells are working correctly, they can adapt to modern phenomena. Our work is to nudge them back into their natural, energetic state by supporting stimulation that is otherwise missing from modern life, and by alleviating modern toxicity that inhibits their activity. So, if you are interested in walking the path outlined in the Mitochondria Mastery Map, we would love to work with you. You can check below for details on how we might work together on this. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.